On August 11, 1909, the ship S.S. Arapahoe was in trouble, disabled in dangerous waters off of Cape Hatteras, when the captain used a resource that was previously unavailable. He ordered his wireless operator to send a distress call via Morse code. It is the first known time in history that an American ship used the international code S.O.S. Today, that code is known by virtually everybody all over the world. Its meaning seems to have outlasted the code for which it was created. The history of ... dash 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 ... deserves to be remembered. The steamer Arapahoe was built by the William Cramp & Sons Shipbuilding Company, launched on May 18, 1901. The launching ceremony went particularly well, with the Philadelphia Inquirer noting that so smoothly did the boat hit the water that there was scarcely a splash. 310 feet long and 46 feet wide, the ship, built for the Clyde Steamship Line, was outfitted to carry 200 passengers and up to 3,000 tons of cargo. It was a grand vessel that, along with its sister S.S. Apache, the Daytona Beach Gazette News described as floating palaces. The finest coastwise passenger ships ever built are fitted luxuriously, having every appliance known to modern shipbuilding. The Arapahoe was scheduled to run regular service between New York and southern ports, down to Jacksonville. The Brooklyn Eagle noted that with the addition of the Apache and the Arapahoe, the Clyde Line will have 17 ocean-going steamships. The ship was christened by Miss Dorothy Cramp, daughter of the shipyard owner Edwin Cramp, something the Inquirer considered to be fortuitous, as Miss Cramp was warmly hailed as the luckiest of lucky sponsors. The vessels that were named at her hands, the Inquirer wrote, seemed to have an unusual run of good fortune, or at least an unusual absence of ill luck in their careers. But luck can't last forever. On August 11, 1909, the Arapahoe was traveling its normal route from New York, bound first for Charleston, just off the treacherous Diamond Shoals of Cape Hatteras, when she broke her tail shaft. The loss of the shaft that drives her screw meant that the ship was without power. Adrift. Documentary filmmaker Paul Armorow explained the dire situation. The area was known as the graveyard of the Atlantic because two powerful ocean forces met there, the Arctic's Labrador Current and the much warmer Gulf Stream. And since the Arapahoe was basically adrift at the mercy of the waves, it could easily be capsized in the rough water, or else driven into the nearby Diamond Shoals and sunk. But the Arapahoe, among the every appliance known to modern shipbuilding, had a device becoming more common at sea, a wireless telegraph. Ship's Captain Ira K. Chichester now placed the safety of the vessel in the hands of the ship's new wireless operator, Theodore H. Hobner, who the Jersey City Observer described as a high school lad of but 18 years of age. Hobner, upon whose skills the 150 passengers aboard now depended, was on his first voyage with the Clyde Line. Moreover, the Observer writes, he had been with the United Wireless System but 4 months. The young man was self-taught. The Observer explains, he learned the game of wireless telegraphy by flashing and snatching messages from the air by means of an instrument he put together himself. This was not an uncommon thing in the early days of wireless radio, as the International Amateur Radio Union explains. Following in the footsteps of Marconi and other pioneers, thousands of young experimenters built simple spark transmitters and receivers to send Morse code messages around their neighborhoods. But it turns out the passengers and crew of the Arapahoe were in good hands. The Observer reports, sitting calmly at the keyboard of the cubbyhole of a station aboard an ocean greyhound, crippled and drifting helpless towards one of the most treacherous chains of shoals and hidden reefs along the Atlantic coast, Theodore Hobner of 28 Storm Avenue, Jersey City, the youthful hero of this modern sea tale, sent the S.O.S., which brought aid from several different points. Originally picked up at the wireless station in Beaufort, North Carolina, the message quickly spread. The Observer writes, the man on the lonely Carolina coast had the warning shooting out to New York 5 minutes later. The next day, the Norfolk, Virginia pilot wrote, the revenue cutter Wilmington, North Carolina, had been notified, as had tugboats along the coast, and many of them are now speeding on to find the disabled ship and render aid. This was the first known use of the code S.O.S. by an American vessel, and it was a wonder, as the Observer raves. This work of talking back and forth hundreds of miles was done in quicker time than it takes to get your shoes shined. The New York Times noted the difference such communication makes. What happens on a disabled steamship after the SOS call has been sent out? There's little of the hysterical terror of old-time shipwrecks, for there's always the assurance that help is coming, and the story is told by the wireless message as one of calm seamanship, which brings relief to passengers and inspires the men to work. The difference was also meaningful to those who owned the vessel. As the Observer writes, Hobner had saved the steamship company that employs him many thousands of dollars. In fact, so much aid was sent that Captain Chichester could refuse some aid, as the line had been contacted and a sister vessel, S.S. Iroquois, was dispatched to tow the Arapahoe to Charleston, although rising seas eventually compelled Chichester to instead accept the help of an ocean-going tug before Iroquois could arrive. The Arapahoe was repaired and back at sea by early December when, Amberrow writes, something outrageous happened. Hobner was back in his cubbyhole when he received a message. The Iroquois, the vessel that had been dispatched to Arapahoe's aid in August, was sending what is thought to be only the second S.O.S. from an American vessel. The Camden, New Jersey Courier Post reports that Iroquois sailed from New York with a full passenger list and a valuable cargo. She ran into a real winter gale after pushing her nose outside the sheltering line of Sandy Hook, and on the afternoon of December 27th was struck astern by a mountainous sea which smashed her rudder. In a strange bit of irony, the Iroquois, line sister of the Arapahoe, was in distress in nearly the same area and situation that the Arapahoe had been, and Hobner, who had sent the S.O.S. then, received it now, becoming the first U.S. wireless operator known to have both sent and received an S.O.S. Arapahoe offered aid but was not the closest vessel. Iroquois was rescued and towed by another Clyde Line vessel. Apparently, the line's luck was not so much derived from Miss Dorothy Cramp as they were by the miracle of wireless telegraphy. The young Hobner showed his skill again in December 1910, when working for the Ocean Steamship Company, he managed to make wireless contact with a vessel in the Pacific, some 5,000 miles away, earning, the Jersey City Jersey Journal explained, the record for long-distance wireless communication. The extraordinary story of the young Theodore Hobner illustrated the value of wireless telegraphy and the standardized code for a ship in distress. But while his might have been the first S.O.S. issued from an American ship, it was certainly not the beginning of the story of the wireless distress call. In fact, Hobner at the time was compared to another wireless operator well known to the public, Jack Binns. RMS Republic was described as a palatial ocean liner which operated for the White Star Line between Liverpool and Boston. On January 24, 1909, Republic collided with the Italian liner S.S. Florida in thick fog off of Nantucket Island. The Sydney, New South Wales Daily Telegraph reported, within a few seconds of the shock, hundreds of men, women, and children were running from below the decks of the Republic. Every light was extinguished. Torrents of water roared through the great cavity in the vessel's side, extinguished the fires, and stopped the engines. Republic, with 742 passengers and crew aboard, was sinking. As the vessel was slowly sinking and the overloaded and heavily damaged Florida took on all the passengers she could, a new kind of hero arose and became known to the public, the wireless operator. The Minneapolis Journal wrote, "One can never tell just when circumstances are going to make of him a hero." Of course, in these past few days, full of news of the disaster to the ocean liner Republic, you've heard the name Jack Binns. For if it had not been for Jack Binns, his cool head, his courage, his devotion to duty, word of the disaster might not have been received by other ships in the vicinity, and the Republic might have gone down, with all on board. The Journal explains 5 o'clock in the morning is pretty early for a man to be at work, but Jack Binns was up in his little cabin with the wireless even then. Before the startled passengers realized what had happened, Binns was already clicking out the call for help that reached half a dozen steamers miles and miles away, so far away that even if there had been no fog, not one of them would have been in sight from horizon to horizon. Staying at his post on the sinking vessel for 2 hours, Binns brought aid in the form of the fellow White Star liner Baltic, which, along with other vessels, arrived in time to rescue the remaining passengers. While 6 people died in the collision, all passengers and crew were evacuated. None died in the sinking. Astounding, as passenger ships of the era typically did not carry enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. While the summoning of aid and rescue was described as a triumph for Marconi, there was a certain irony to the story. As the Telegraph reported, Republic was christened the millionaire's ship before she cleared New York because of the number of conspicuous and enormously wealthy Americans on board. Binns, whose tireless work had facilitated their rescue, was paid just $12 a week. The New York Evening World rightly noted, measured on the basis of real public service, Jack Benz is worth considerably more than 3 million stockbrokers. The Republic was the largest ship ever to have sunk to that point in time, and Jack Benz had been the first wireless operator to use an international distress code to summon aid in a maritime emergency. But as an odd bit of historical trivia, Benz did not use the same code as Hopner. In 1923, Benz wrote a history on the origin of the SOS call in the magazine Radio World. He wrote, when wireless telegraphy was first placed into commercial use, the ordinary telegraph and cable systems had been in operation several years and had reached a high state of development. Among the rules established was a series of double-letter symbols that were used by operators to facilitate the working of special circuits, and these symbols invariably incorporated the letter Q because it is one of the least used letters in the alphabet. In these various groups was the signal CQ. This was used on telegraph lines where more than one station was on the line, and it meant that the operator sending the call wanted every station along the line to listen to what he was about to say. Binns writes that these codes were carried over when Marconi's radio company began commercial operation at sea in 1902, the code name to be used by ships with minor emergencies. But there was an issue, and was quickly observed, Binns wrote, that the call CQ was not sufficient distinction for emergency purposes. As a result, in 1904 the Marconi Company issued a general order that on or after February 1st, 1904, the call to be given by ships in distress or in any way requiring assistance shall be CQD. While some seem to have concluded that CQD meant come quick, danger, in fact the code was, Bin notes, simple expediency arrived at by ordinary evolution of the detailed work of communication. The letters never stood for anything. But in 1905, a March 25th, 2025 edition of Reader's Digest noted, the German government had put out a set of regulations that designated S.O.S as the code name for a ship in distress. Compared to CQD, the S.O.S was more efficient. Reader's Digest explains. Whether relayed audibly via radio or visually as 3 short flashes or a flashlight followed by 3 long flashes and then 3 more short flashes, the sequence of triplet dots and dashes proposed by the German government soon became the international favorite for its elegant simplicity. When in 1906 the first International Radio Telegraph Convention met in Berlin, the participants agreed to use the S.O.S code, effective July of 1908. But, Binns writes, as this convention was not completely ratified by all the nations represented for at least a year, the call CQD remained in force sufficiently long enough to be used in the first major sea disaster where wireless played an important part. And by that he means, of course, the sinking of RMS Republic, where he himself sent the distress code CQD, not SOS. He further commented that the call SOS is purely arbitrary in its grouping of letters and was chosen because of the unusual combination of dots and dashes, which makes it distinctive above all other calls. That is, SOS does not, as some assume, mean save our ship or save our souls. Like CQD, SOS stands for nothing at all. Which brings us to one of the most famous SOSs in history. In 1912, RMS Titanic sank. The loss of this great ship was a seminal event, still probably the most famous shipwreck in history. And perhaps owing to the public's fascination, there's a common myth that Titanic was the first ship to use the code SOS. This misconception may have been because of a story related by Harold Bride, Titanic's junior wireless operator, who survived the sinking. According to Bride, Titanic's senior wireless operator was using the familiar code CQD when Bride suggested, "Send SOS, it's the new call, and besides, this may be your last chance to send it." They laughed at the bit of humor in the midst of disaster, and the story may be one reason why people, even sometimes historians writing about Titanic, continue to spread the myth that Titanic sent out the first SOS in history, something denied not just by the story 3 years earlier of Theodore Hopner and S.S. Arapahoe, but that story even predated by what is thought to be the first use of SOS by a ship, by the Cunard liner Slavonia, which ran aground on the Azores June 10, 1909. But the shift between codes did create a problem for Titanic, as Reader's Digest notes. As the Titanic sank into the ocean in April 1912, it broadcast a mix of CQD and SOS calls, and the resulting confusion helped take CQD out of use for good. The Titanic disaster actually revealed a number of weaknesses in the use of wireless distress calls, but the tide, so to speak, had already shifted, as naval historian Robert Bigelow wrote in the U.S. Naval Institute Press in 1951. Wireless was quickly adopted throughout the world. By 1910, some 1,500 merchant ships were equipped, And during the 3 years 1909 to 1911, the passengers on no fewer than 22 shipwrecked vessels owed their lives to the fact that the ships were equipped with a wireless telegraph system and were consequently able to send out messages for assistance. In fact, the first wireless distress call from a ship probably predates both the code CQD and SOS. The first known example goes all the way back to 1899 when the British East Goodwin lightship used its wireless to summon the aid of a lifeboat when it noticed that a merchant vessel had run aground. You might think that the code SOS will become irrelevant in the electronic age when we have automated distress calls and satellite communications and global positioning systems. But the maritime safety website Fathom Safety notes that the SOS signal remains an important symbol of distress and emergency that's recognized by people all over the world. For example, you can use it when you can't connect vocal communications by flashing your dots and dashes with a flashlight or a mirror, or stomping SOS into sand or snow in order to signal aircraft. It's such an importantly internationally recognized symbol that some nations use SOS to mark the location of emergency telephones, and most cell phones have an SOS function on them. Shoot, it's even made its way into popular music by artists as diverse as ABBA and Rihanna. So it seems that the convention that has helped to save so many lives at sea will continue to be a signal of distress well into the future. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.